Racist police officer humiliates black judge without realizing her true identity. But when he finally discovers who she really is, he deeply regrets his actions and everything changes in a shocking way. The sun was slowly setting over Brooklyn, painting the sky orange and pink as Officer Brad drove his patrol car through familiar streets. He had always enjoyed the feeling of power that came with the badge, believing that his authority made him superior to others. However, that hot afternoon brought a different vibe. Something felt out of place, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Spotting a car parked irregularly, a dark Nissan, he pulled over and stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his belt and placing his hat on his head. Without hesitation, he approached the car with firm, determined steps. The driver, a black woman in her 30s, looked nervously through the rearview mirror. Brad didn't care. He was there to enforce the law. "Sorry, officer, I was just—" The woman began to explain, but he interrupted her. "Apologies don't help, ma'am. What do you think you're doing parking here as if you own the street?" Brad said, leaning slightly into the car with a look of disdain. "You do realize this is a problem, right?" The woman took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I understand that I'm parked illegally, but I just stopped for a moment to grab a document. I'm a judge, and—" "Judge? That doesn't mean anything to me. You people always think you're above the law." Brad shot back, crossing his arms and smirking sarcastically. "Do you really think you have the right to challenge the authority of the police?" The woman was visibly indignant. "Challenge authority? I'm just trying to explain the situation. You can't act this way just because you're in uniform." Frustration was palpable in her voice, but Brad remained unshaken. He had decided that she deserved the treatment she was receiving. "Look, if you can't respect the law, don't expect to be respected. And perhaps, just perhaps, you should think twice before parking where you shouldn't. This is just a sign of your lack of respect," he retorted. The atmosphere grew tense and the confrontation escalated. The woman looked him in the eyes, her expression shifting from fear to quiet determination. "I am Judge Victoria, and what you're doing is a violation of my rights. This isn't just about parking. It's about how you, as a police officer, treat people. Don't forget that I am also a citizen." Brad hesitated, a cold feeling settling in his stomach as he heard her name. He knew who Victoria was. Her face was familiar from the news, often advocating against police brutality and fighting for civil rights. What he had done was not merely a mistake. It was a public humiliation for someone in a position of power, and the weight of her words hit him like a punch in the gut. I didn't know," Brad stammered, his confidence slipping away. He stepped back from the car feeling small and confused. The pride that had driven him to act so hostile was now fading, replaced by shame. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "Yes, you shouldn't have," Victoria replied, her voice firm but with a hint of compassion. She watched him retreat, realizing that behind his bravado was a man grappling with his own demons. The indignation she had felt was now mingled with the desire to understand the reason for his behavior. "I hope one day you see this differently," she added before continuing on her way, while Brad remained there, paralyzed, feeling the weight of his beliefs crumbling around him. Victoria entered her home, still shaken by the humiliating encounter with the officer. The warmth of the afternoon had turned into an unbearable weight on her shoulders, and a sense of helplessness enveloped her like a heavy cloak. As she crossed the threshold, she found her mother in the kitchen, busy preparing dinner. The smell of rice and beans filled the air, but the familiar aroma couldn't calm her restless mind. "Mom," Victoria began, her voice trembling. "You won't believe what happened, Her mother, a woman with gray hair and a wise expression, turned with concern in her eyes. "What is it, my daughter? You look so shaken." Victoria took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "I was stopped by a police officer. He treated me so aggressively with racial insults. And when I identified myself as a judge, he froze. But still, he walked away, confused. I felt so humiliated." Her mother stopped what she was doing and approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Oh, Victoria, that's disheartening. But you know this isn't new, right? You've faced it before, and you will face it again." "I know, but it's so exhausting," Victoria said, sitting at the table. "I just wish people could see beyond skin color. It's as if all my work, all the fights I've fought, mean nothing to them. You are a fighter, dear, and you have a unique gift for turning that pain into strength." Her mother sat beside her, holding her hands. "Use it. Instead of letting this experience bring you down, let it move you. You can make a difference." Victoria looked into her mother's eyes, feeling the determination that had always guided her. Do you think I should do something about it? Talk to him? Show him that racism isn't just a word but a wound that hurts lives? Yes, I think so. Dialogue is the key to change. You can be the voice he needs to hear. It's not about revenge but about education. Propose a meeting. Who knows? He might transform too. Her mother smiled, proud of her daughter. After their conversation, Victoria felt a new sense of purpose growing within her. Instead of allowing anger to consume her, she chose to be the agent of change she always aspired to be. With that determination, she began planning the meeting. Deep down, she knew it would be difficult, but the idea of turning pain into dialogue felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. That night, as the city lit up with the glow of nighttime, Victoria sat at her desk, a notebook in hand, writing a message to Brad. The words flowed, filled with emotion and hope. Dear Officer Brad, I would like to propose a meeting. I believe that if we have the opportunity to talk, we can better understand our experiences and perhaps find a way toward change. Racism is not just a personal issue, but a problem that affects us all. She read and reread the text, her heart pounding. Let's see if he has the courage to listen, she thought. With one last sigh, she sent the message, feeling as though she had taken the first step towards a dialogue that, if successful, could not only change a man's heart, but also impact the community as a whole. Before we continue with this gripping story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know which city you're watching this video from in the comments. Victoria gazed out the window, observing the city lights. She knew the struggle was far from over, but the flame of hope burned brightly inside her, and as challenging as it was, she was determined to turn that bitter night into a new beginning. Brad was sitting in a dark bar in Brooklyn, a beer in hand and a distant look in his eyes. The atmosphere was filled with sounds of laughter and animated conversations, but he felt isolated in the midst of the crowd. What should have been a night of relaxation with colleagues was becoming a heavy burden on his shoulders. He had encountered something that challenged his deepest beliefs, leaving him restless. "Hey man, are you okay?" asked Mike, his closest colleague, as he sat down next to him. "You look like you've seen a ghost. You won't believe what happened today," Brad replied, taking a sip of his beer and staring at the table. "I confronted a driver, and, well, I was an idiot. I insulted her, and when she introduced herself as a judge and I didn't know what to say." "Judge? Are you talking about Judge Victoria?" Mike paused, concern etched on his face. "She's one of the best. You couldn't have picked a worse person to do that to." I know, Brad exclaimed, feeling heat rise to his face. I let anger and prejudice speak for me. I didn't think twice." "Brad, you need to understand that this isn't just about you and your ego. This is institutional racism. It's a problem that affects millions of people every day," Mike said, his voice firm. "And you need to stop seeing yourself as the victim here." "But how did I get to this point? What happened to me?" Brad questioned, anguished. "I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone thought that way. It was normal. But now, I feel like a monster. We're all shaped by where we come from, but that doesn't mean you can't change," Mike replied, watching his friend with empathy. "You need to face this head on. Go back and really reflect on your beliefs." "It's easy for you to say that," Brad said, his voice heavy with frustration. "You don't understand what it's like to be a cop and deal with this reality every day." "Don't understand? I grew up in an environment where I was seen as a suspect just because of the color of my skin. But that didn't stop me from seeing beyond the stereotypes," Mike responded, his tone becoming more intense. "You need to ask yourself, what do you really stand for? Who do you want to be?" Brad looked at Mike, the weight of his words pressing down on his mind. He remembered his childhood, the jokes he heard, the looks he received. I just wanted to be accepted. I wanted my friends not to see me as weak. It's hard to change, Mike, and what if I can't?" "You can, Brad. Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. And you've already taken the first step by recognizing that there's a problem," Mike replied, keeping his gaze fixed on his friend. "What you need to do now is seek to understand the experiences of others. You have the power to be part of the solution." "I don't know how to do that," Brad confessed, his voice now softer. "What if I fail? What if I'm rejected by those I've always considered friends?" "If you fail, you get up and try again." "And about your friends? If they can't accept that you're trying to be a better person, maybe it's time to reevaluate your friendships," Mike suggested, giving a slight smile. "Sometimes what you need is the courage to step away from what's comfortable and move closer to what's right." Brad took a deep breath, feeling a wave of determination begin to rise within him. "Do you really think I can do this? That I can change?" "I know you can," Mike affirmed, placing a hand on Brad's shoulder. "But you need to want this. And more importantly, you need to be willing to listen. The world isn't just black and white, there's a lot of gray, and you need to explore that." Brad looked down at his beer, the reflection of his actions weighing heavily on his mind. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but maybe, just maybe, there was a path to change. And in that moment, surrounded by the noise and life around him, he decided he was ready to face his fears and prejudices, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The cafe, located on a busy street in Brooklyn, had a warm atmosphere, but tension hung in the air like a fog. Brad, nervous, fiddled with his coffee cup while Victoria's gaze pierced through him with a mix of empathy and firmness. She had proposed this meeting not just as a way to discuss the shocking incident, but as an opportunity for change, for both of them. Victoria took a deep breath and was the first to break the silence. "Brad, I know this meeting isn't easy for you, but I believe we need to talk about what happened, not just to understand, but to learn." She spoke with impressive calmness, her voice controlled yet filled with emotion. He looked down, ashamed, remembering the humiliation he had caused her. I don't know what to say. I was an idiot. I acted in a way that makes no sense, and I'm sorry. But what do you expect me to do now?" Frustration and confusion mingled in his tone. Victoria shook her head, understanding his internal struggle. "It's not just about apologizing, Brad. What I want is for you to understand the impact of your words and actions. For you, I was just a driver, but for me, that moment symbolized years of fighting against prejudice. It's not just an individual issue. It's a systemic issue that perpetuates oppression." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mix of anger and vulnerability. "But I'm not a racist, I'm a cop. I'm here to protect people, not to hurt them. And that's why we need to talk," Victoria insisted, her voice firm. "You have the chance to be part of the change, Brad. But it starts with your willingness to listen and learn. Are you willing to do that?" Brad hesitated, struggling against his own resistance. I don't know. I never thought I needed to learn anything about this. I always thought I was doing my job. And maybe you thought that way because you never had to face this personally before," Victoria replied, her empathetic expression softening. "But have you ever stopped to think about the experiences of people who don't have the same privilege as you? Every insult, every hostile approach you make has a real impact on someone's life. I am a judge, but I am still black, and that means I face prejudice every day." The weight of Victoria's words hit Brad like a punch to the stomach. He remembered moments from his childhood when he heard racist comments from friends and family, but he always ignored or justified them. The idea that he, someone who considered himself just, could have contributed to the problem left him uneasy. What if I don't know how to change? What if I fail? Everyone fails, Brad. True courage lies in recognizing that and striving to improve. I'm not here to judge you, but to help you understand. The first step is always the hardest, Victoria replied, looking him in the eyes with sincerity. So what do you suggest? He was beginning to open up, but still struggled with his ingrained beliefs. Let's start with a dialogue. I want to share some experiences, some stories that you may have never heard before, and I'd like you to share yours as well. It won't be easy, but it could be the beginning of something important, she said, her voice filled with hope. Brad nodded slowly, feeling a bit lighter but still skeptical. I'm willing to listen. I just hope this makes a difference. Victoria smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. It does, Brad. Every step counts, and just the fact that you're here is already a start. As the coffee continued to bubble in the background, the two engaged in a dialogue that, while tense, was filled with promises of transformation, creating a bridge between two realities that had seemed irreconcilable until then. Brad was nervous as he headed to the courthouse. Victoria's talk on institutional racism was an important event, and he knew he should be there, even though his mind was in conflict. He recalled the humiliation he had inflicted on her and the pain it had caused. As he entered the room, the atmosphere was charged with expectation. The seats were nearly all occupied, and he spotted Victoria on stage, adjusting the microphone, with a serene expression that contrasted with the turmoil he felt inside. Some participants looked at him with curiosity, while others cast critical glances. Brad sat at the back of the room trying to hide in the shadows, but Victoria's presence drew him in. When she began to speak, her voice was firm, yet gentle. Today, I want to talk about something that affects not only the lives of people like me, but our entire society. she said, looking directly at the audience. Institutional racism is not just a matter of individual attitudes but of entrenched systems that perpetuate inequality. Brad listened attentively as Victoria shared her own story. She described moments of discrimination she had faced throughout her career as a judge, from distrustful looks in courtrooms to the constant struggle to be heard in a room full of white men. I remember a case where the defense tried to discredit my position simply because I am a black woman, she continued, the emotion evident in her voice. But this is not just my problem. It's a problem that affects the entire community. The audience was silent, absorbing every word. Brad felt a wave of guilt rising within him as he realized he had contributed to this reality. He looked around at the faces of those around him, many reflecting pain and indignation. Racism is not just an isolated act of hostility, Victoria continued. It's a cycle that perpetuates itself, infiltrating our judicial processes, our schools, our everyday lives. She paused, allowing her words to resonate in the room. Today I want us all to reflect on our own beliefs and actions. Ask yourselves, what can I do to change this? How can I be part of the solution? Brad felt his heart race. He remembered his conversations with Mike, how he had been challenged to rethink his attitudes, but now, hearing Victoria, the urgency felt palpable. I'm here to ask that we all come together, Victoria continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. We need allies. And allies are not just those who stand up to speak against injustice, but those who are willing to listen, learn, and change. Brad was taken aback. He knew he had so much to learn, but the idea of being an ally felt like a heavy responsibility. After the talk, Victoria invited participants to share their own experiences. A young man stood up and spoke about the difficulties he faced trying to get a job because of his name. An older woman shared a story of discrimination she experienced in her youth. Brad listened, each story resonating deeply within him, as if each word was a reminder of what he needed to confront within himself. When the QA session began, Brad finally stood up, feeling compelled to speak. I'm a police officer, he began, his voice trembling. And honestly, I've been struggling with what happened between us. I grew up in an environment where racism was normalized, and I never thought about the impact of that. I don't want to be that person. I want to learn. The silence in the courtroom was profound, and Brad felt the reactions around him. Some looks were skeptical, while others showed support. Victoria smiled at him, a warm smile that lit up her face. The first thing you need to do is be honest with yourself. Change starts within us, she replied, her tone encouraging. And you've already taken the first step by being willing to listen and learn. The talk ended, but for Brad, the journey was just beginning. He realized that despite his mistakes, there was room for transformation. And looking at Victoria, he saw not just a judge, but a leader, someone willing to help others find their way toward change. The march in support of police reform was scheduled for later that afternoon, and the atmosphere in Brooklyn was one of anticipation and hope. The streets were adorned with colorful posters, many bearing powerful messages like "Justice for All" and "Say No to Racism." Victoria, dressed simply yet impactfully, was at the center of organizing the event. She knew that every detail mattered, and that the community's presence was crucial for the movement's success. Meanwhile, Brad, nervous, approached. He hesitated for a moment, remembering all the looks he might encounter, but decided he needed to face this new phase of his life. It's time to show that I've really changed, he murmured to himself, adjusting his jacket as he headed to the meeting point. He saw several people already gathered, some chatting animatedly, others holding flags and banners. When he finally joined the group, he felt a bit out of place. You're here to redeem yourself, Brad. Don't look back now, he thought, taking a deep breath. Beside him, a young man with braided hair looked at him, a look of distrust on his face. Aren't you that cop who had the fight with the judge? He asked, his tone sharp. Yes, that's me. But I'm here to learn and support, Brad replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tension in his stomach. The young man studied him, weighing his sincerity. I hope you're serious. We need allies, not enemies, he said before walking away. Victoria was on a small makeshift platform, surrounded by supporters and activists. When she saw Brad, an encouraging smile spread across her face. She knew he was trying to do the right thing, and that motivated her even more. You made it, Brad. You're here, she thought, feeling that he was taking an important step not just for himself, but for the community. The march began to move, and Victoria climbed onto the platform, The murmur of voices quieted as she took the microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are here together, not just as neighbors, but as a community calling for change. Her voice resonated with passion. We are here to demand that the police serve and protect everyone without distinction. Racism has no place in our society. Applause echoed through the crowd, and Brad felt a warmth in his chest. He looked around and saw people of different ethnicities, ages, and backgrounds all united for a common cause. This is bigger than me, he thought as his hands joined those around him. Victoria continued, this isn't just about violence. It's about a system that needs to be restructured. We need transparency, we need accountability, and we need dialogues, like the one I had with Brad. She paused to look directly at him, and the crowd turned to Brad, who felt the weight of all those gazes. If he can change, we all can. Change starts from within, and together we can make a difference. After her speech, the crowd began to march through the streets chanting slogans like Black Lives Matter and Reform Now. Brad joined in the clamor, feeling that each step he took was a step toward redemption. He looked at Victoria, who was leading the way, inspiring everyone around her. I want to be part of this, he thought, deciding that he wouldn't turn back. The march continued to a large open space where a rally was about to take place. People began to gather around a larger stage. The atmosphere was electrically charged, and Brad felt more than just a spectator. He was now an integral part of that struggle. Victoria, you're doing an amazing job, he shouted, rising above the crowd. She smiled at him, a smile of recognition and gratitude. As the march approached its climax, Brad realized that this was not just an event. It was a movement. He looked at the people around him, all united by a greater purpose. We're in this together, he thought, feeling increasingly confident in his new journey. And in that moment he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Brad found himself in an environment that was both familiar and uncomfortable. The classroom, located in a police department building, was filled with officers of various ranks, all seated in chairs arranged in a semicircle. The atmosphere was tense, and he could feel some colleagues' stares weighing heavily on his shoulders. He knew that his decision to sign up for the re-education program, led by Victoria and Mike, wouldn't be well received by everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria, and I'm a judge, but I'm here today as your facilitator. This is a safe space to discuss issues that we often avoid. Victoria began, her voice firm and clear. She was radiant, not just from the strength she emanated, but from the determination to transform the environment around her. Brad observed her confidence and felt a mix of admiration and apprehension. He knew he was about to face a challenge greater than any night patrol. Looking at his colleagues' faces, he realized that many of them were unwilling to listen. What does the judge know about our work? One officer murmured from the back of the room, and others laughed sarcastically. Brad's heart raced. He knew this was a problem that needed to be confronted. Let's start with a simple exercise. I want everyone to think of a moment when you felt wronged, Victoria said, with a smile that aimed to disarm the tension. It can be something small, but that has impacted you deeply. Brad hesitated but decided to participate. He closed his eyes and remembered his childhood, when a teacher had belittled him in front of the class because of his grades. The feeling of humiliation was still fresh in his memory. Can I share? He asked, raising his hand hesitantly. Of course, Brad. This is the moment to open up, Victoria replied, encouraging him with her gaze. When I was about 10 years old, a teacher called me an idiot in front of the whole class because I didn't know the answer to a question. At the time I felt small, as if nothing I did was enough. And strangely, that stuck with me, he confessed, his voice trembling slightly. It seems silly now, but it was the first time I realized the weight of humiliation. Victoria nodded, understanding the depth of what he had shared. Thank you for sharing that with us, Brad. Humiliation can shape us in ways we don't always recognize. Now think about how this experience can relate to what many of us, especially people of color, experience daily at the hands of the police. The room fell silent. The faces that had laughed before now looked thoughtful. Brad felt a small relief as he realized that he might be beginning to open up a space for reflection among his colleagues. Let's discuss the importance of listening to each other's stories, and how that can help us better understand experiences that are outside our own bubble, Victoria continued. Our role as police officers is not just to maintain order, but also to understand and support the community we vow to protect. Mike, who was sitting next to Brad, raised his hand. I think a lot of us don't know how to deal with racial issues. It's as if we've been taught to see the world in a very limited way. Change begins here, but we need to be willing to confront our own beliefs. Brad looked at Mike, admiring his courage in expressing that thought. He realized he wasn't alone on his transformation journey. But what if we don't want to listen? What if deep down we're comfortable in our ignorance? Asked an older police officer, his tone skeptical. That's the first step toward change. We need to acknowledge that even if we don't want to hear it, the reality of the people we serve is different from our own. Victoria replied without hesitation. Change doesn't happen overnight, but each of you has the power to contribute to a fairer environment. By the end of the class, Brad felt exhausted but also hopeful. He realized the journey would be long and full of challenges, but he was determined to continue. With each word from Victoria, he felt more empowered in his decision to change. Looking around, he saw that some colleagues were still skeptical, while others seemed willing to listen and learn. It was a small beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Brad sat at the meeting table in the precinct, nervous. The room was filled with colleagues, many of whom were longtime acquaintances, now looking at him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He felt the weight of his past actions, the shame that still lingered from that fateful encounter with Victoria. The atmosphere was tense. Murmurs quieted when Sergeant Hudson, one of the veterans on the team, gestured for Brad to start speaking. "Well, I think all of you already know what happened," Brad began, his voice trembling but determined. He looked at the faces before him, many of them friends and others, adversaries. In that encounter, I not only failed as a police officer but also as a human being. I let prejudice shape my actions, and that embarrasses me. A low murmur swept through the room. Brad took a deep breath, trying to muster his courage. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had done. Judge Victoria is not just a black woman. She is a respected professional, a defender of civil rights, and I treated her as if she were less than that. My eyes were so blinded by prejudice that I didn't see the person in front of me. "And what do you expect us to do with that?" questioned Mike, his colleague, who had always been more open to racial issues. "Do you think an apology will change anything?" "No, Mike, that's not what I'm saying," Brad replied, feeling the tension rise. "I'm not here to apologize and expect everything to be okay. I'm here to say that I want to change. I want to understand and learn. I enrolled in a police re-education program, and I want all of you to do the same. We need to understand what's happening around us, the injustices that so many face." The looks in the room were varied. Some seemed skeptical, others contemplative. Sergeant Hudson, who had always been a defender of police traditions, frowned. "And if this is just a phase, Brad, what guarantees you that this change isn't just surface level? Because this isn't just about me," Brad responded, his voice rising in intensity. "It's about our team, about the police as a whole. Our mistakes affect people's lives. I don't want to be a police officer who perpetuates racism. I want to be an agent of change. And if that means confronting my colleagues, then I'm willing to do it." "Do you really think we will all follow your lead? You messed up, Brad. That doesn't just wipe clean with a lecture," shot back another colleague, who had always shown resistance to questioning the norms. "What if we simply don't care about this?" "If you don't care, then the problem is much bigger than I thought," Brad replied, his voice now firm. "But I hope you do care. I hope we can work together to change this. The police should protect and serve, not be a source of fear and oppression." A silence fell over the room as Brad's words hung in the air. Finally, Mike broke the tension. "I'm willing to listen more, Brad. I've always believed that change starts with dialogue. It's a tough journey, but if you're willing to lead, I'll be by your side." Brad felt a slight relief at Mike's support, but knew many were still hesitant. "I don't expect everyone to agree with me, but I hope we can have conversations. We need to understand each other's stories. And if necessary, I want to publicly apologize to Victoria. I want her to know that I'm here to learn." Hudson seemed to ponder, looking at Brad with a softer expression. "Maybe you're right, Brad. Change doesn't happen overnight. But if you really want this, we can support you. But you need to be prepared for people's reactions." "I'm prepared," Brad affirmed, feeling the weight of his words. "And if anyone wants to confront me, I'm ready to listen. What matters is that we, as police officers, can change how we act and how we see the community we serve." The room began to murmur again, and Brad sensed something different in the air. He didn't know if everyone was ready for this change, but he was willing to try, to expose himself and face his own demons. Above all, he wanted to be an example that transformation was possible, even for those who had erred deeply. The community event was approaching, and the atmosphere in Brooklyn was charged with anticipation. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as residents gathered in the local park. A simple yet well-lit stage had been set up with banners calling for justice and equality. Brad was visibly nervous. He leaned against a tree, observing the hustle around him while mentally reviewing the words he intended to share alongside Victoria. "Are you ready, Brad?" Victoria asked, approaching him. Her demeanor was calm and confident, a light of determination that always surrounded her. She wore a white blouse and a black skirt, dignified like a judge, but with a touch of informality that made her more approachable to the audience. I don't know. I'm worried about what I'm going to say. What if people don't listen to me?" Brad replied, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, a burden he never imagined he would carry. "You have an important story to tell, Brad. It's not just about you, it's about all of us. Change begins with dialogue, and your voice can be a bridge. Don't underestimate the power of your journey." "Reminder." Victoria smiled encouragingly, and Brad felt a bit of security forming within him. As the event began, the audience gathered around the stage. Victoria was the first to step up. With a microphone in hand, she looked out at the crowd, which was attentive and eager. "Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be here with you today. We are here to discuss a topic that affects each of us, the fight against racism and injustice in our society. Eat you." Hearing Victoria's words, Brad felt a warmth growing in his chest. He knew she had a unique ability to touch people, and the way she spoke inspired him to find his own voice. This fight is not just about those in the streets, but also about those who have the power to make a difference, like the police. Victoria continued, "We need allies. We need people willing to listen and transform. Change begins when we choose to engage in dialogue rather than conflict." Brad observed every expression in the crowd, every nod of agreement, and his confidence began to bloom slowly. He knew that when it was his turn to speak, he would have to be honest and transparent about his experiences. After Victoria's impactful speech, which was met with warm applause, Brad stepped up to the stage, his heart racing. He took a deep breath, held the microphone, and looked out at the audience. "Hi, I'm Brad. To many of you, I'm just a police officer. But for me, that is a part of my identity that I am trying to change." He paused for a moment, sensing the tension in the air. "I am not the man I used to be. Some time ago, I acted prejudiced and hostile, dividing the world into right and wrong based on stereotypes and ignorance. But after a very difficult encounter with Judge Victoria, my life changed." The audience listened intently, and Brad felt a wave of support that encouraged him to continue. "Victoria showed me that it is possible to listen and learn, that change is a journey, not a destination. I learned that we all have a responsibility, not just to evaluate ourselves, but to fight for a fairer world. You care about the opinions of those around you, but what truly matters is how you see yourself and how you relate to others," Victoria added, smiling at him and reminding him that he was not alone. Brad felt tears welling up, but held them back. "I don't have all the answers, but I'm here to listen, to learn, and to help build a better future. And I hope you all want to be part of that too." As he finished, the crowd erupted in applause, and Brad realized that despite his fear, he had found his voice and that transformation was possible, not just for him, but for everyone present. After the community event, where Brad shared his journey of transformation alongside Victoria, the atmosphere was charged with hope and renewal. The community applauded, united in a single purpose. However, amid this positive climate, an old acquaintance of Brad's approached, his face carrying an expressio. It was Tom, a former colleague who had always fostered the prejudice and hostility that Brad was now trying to combat. Tom approached, arms crossed, a sarcastic smile on his lips. "Look who's here, the new civil rights advocate. This is a joke, Brad. You, a respectable officer, now joining this nonsense," he said, his voice laced with contempt. Brad, feeling the weight of the community's gaze on his back, took a deep breath. He had mentally prepared himself for resistance, but he didn't expect Tom to show up like this. "It's not a joke, Tom. It's a call to action. Things need to change," he replied, trying to keep calm. Tom laughed, shaking his head. "And do you really believe that a nice speech is going to change years of corruption and prejudice in the police? You're fooling yourself. What you've experienced is just a phase. As soon as things go back to normal, you will forget all of this." Tension mounted, and Victoria's presence watching the scene from a distance made his heart race. She knew Brad was in a delicate moment, battling the voices of the past, trying to pull him back into darkness. But she also knew he had become stronger, more resilient. "Brad, don't let it get to you," Victoria called, walking toward them. "You know that change begins within us. And you are doing that. Ignore the provocations." Tom, noticing Victoria's intervention, turned to her with a challenging look. "And you? What do you know about real life in the police? You're just here to make noise, and that won't change anything. The numbers show the opposite. Look at history." Brad, now more confident, decided he would not back down. "And you, Tom? What do you really know about the untold stories, about the lives ruined because of people like you?" He shot back, his tone growing firmer. In that moment, Tom's expression changed. He knew he was in a vulnerable position. "You don't know anything about me, Brad, and you don't know anything about what I was forced to do to survive in this system," he replied, his voice now lower, revealing a hint of insecurity. But before the conversation could deepen, Victoria intervened again, her voice clear and authoritative. "Tom, you can't use your past as an excuse to perpetuate corruption and racism. You're here trying to destabilize Brad, but what you're really doing is exposing yourself. We are not the same anymore, and well, you're still stuck in the past." Brad looked at Victoria, feeling the strength of her words. It was true. He was no longer alone in this fight, and with the courage he had found, he decided to step forward. "Tom, I'm not who you think I am anymore, and I won't accept that mindset any longer. If you have anything to say, let it be the truth." At that moment, the tension reached its peak, and a crowd began to gather around them, curious about the unfolding scene. Tom, realizing he was losing support, tried to throw a final jab. "You can't erase your past, Brad. You know everyone knows the secrets you tried to hide." But Victoria didn't hesitate. "And you, Tom? What are you hiding? We know about your corrupt actions, how you manipulated investigations and covered up your own mistakes. This conversation isn't about Brad. It's about you," she said, with a piercing gaze. The crowd murmured, some whispering about Tom's actions that had been kept secret. Brad realized that the truth held immense power. "You can no longer intimidate people with your lies and manipulations, Tom. The truth always comes to light," she declared, feeling the growing support of the community around her. And as if a light bulb had gone off, the police arrived, already aware of the situation. Based on the information Victoria had gathered about Tom's corrupt activities, he was confronted and finally arrested in front of the crowd. Brad, now a champion of justice, felt a wave of relief and pride. Not only had he faced his own demons, but he had also helped expose the corruption that had been hidden for so long. Victoria looked at Brad with an approving smile. "You made the right choice, Brad, and this is just the beginning. The fight for justice is ongoing, but together we can make a difference." The crowd, now united in a call for change, applauded, celebrating Brad's courage and Victoria's determination. The day had taken an unexpected turn, but the real transformation was just beginning. We've reached the end of this moving story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Right now, there's a playlist of videos on your screen. If you want to keep watching these touching stories, just click on it, and you'll be watching in no time. And now, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and leave a like to support our work. Now, a sincere question. Do you agree with what happened in the story? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until the next video.